"You're crazy. No one sent you flowers." Her sisters laughed. The words cut sharper than any blade. Hannah stood in the doorway of the small clapboard house, clutching the wilted bouquet she had found on her porch that morning. Her sisters, Ruth and Clara, leaned against the table, their laughter echoing through the room like cruel bells. "Who'd waste blossoms on you?" Clara sneered. "Maybe the wind blew them here." Ruth added, "Or maybe you picked them yourself, pretending someone cared." Hannah's cheeks burned. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but silence was her shield. Years of ridicule had taught her that words only fed their cruelty. She lowered her eyes, fingers trembling against the fragile stems. The sheriff's boots struck the porch outside. Sheriff Dugan, broad-shouldered and cold-eyed, stepped in without knocking. His gaze swept the room, landing on Hannah. "Flowers, is it?" he said, voice dripping disdain. "A woman like you ought to know better. You're meant to fade, not to bloom." The sisters laughed harder, emboldened by his authority. Hannah's humiliation deepened. She felt small, invisible, a shadow in her own home. But outside, the town stirred. Word spread quickly. Hannah, the seamstress mocked by her kin, had received flowers. Children whispered, shopkeepers smirked, and neighbors shook their heads. In a town where a reputation was currency, Hannah's was worth less than dust. She stepped outside, bouquet pressed to her chest, hoping the open air might ease her shame. The street was alive with murmurs. "Crazy Hannah," someone muttered, "imagining suitors." Another voice, "No man would waste his time." Her sisters followed, their laughter carrying into the crowd. Hannah's humiliation became spectacle. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the dust beneath her feet. Then silence. A hush fell over the street. The sound of hooves echoed against the wooden storefronts. A rider approached, tall in the saddle, hat pulled low, revolvers gleaming at his sides. The townsfolk stiffened. Mothers pulled children close. Men stepped back. It was Cole Maddox, the gunfighter whispered about, in every saloon from Abilene to Dodge, a man whose silence was more feared than another's rage. He reined in his horse before Hannah, dismounted with deliberate calm, and stood facing her. The sisters' laughter faltered. The sheriff's jaw tightened. The crowd held its breath. Cole's eyes, cold steel softened by something unspoken, met Hannah's. He glanced at the flowers in her hands, then at the jeering crowd. His voice, low and steady, broke the silence. "I came for her." Gasps rippled through the street. Ruth stammered, "For her?" Clara's face twisted in disbelief. Cole stepped closer, his presence commanding. "Hannah," he said, "I came to ask for your hand." The sheriff barked a laugh, harsh and mocking. "You've lost your mind, Maddox. That woman's a ghost. No man of grit would tie himself to her shame." But Cole did not flinch. His silence was defiance. His gaze never left Hannah's. The bouquet trembled in her hands. Her heart pounded. Was this another cruel trick? Another humiliation? Yet something in Cole's eyes, a steadiness, a recognition held her. The crowd murmured, torn between disbelief and awe. The sisters sputtered, their laughter collapsing into nervous whispers. The sheriff's authority wavered, challenged by the gunfighter's presence. Hannah's humiliation had been the town's entertainment. But in that moment, with Cole Maddox standing before her, the laughter faltered. The cruel chorus dimmed. A seed of redemption, fragile yet undeniable, had been planted. And though Hannah's voice remained silent, her heart whispered, "Perhaps I am not meant to fade." The street still hummed with disbelief. Hannah stood frozen, clutching the flowers, her sisters whispering sharp as knives. Sheriff Dugan's smirk lingered, but the crowd's eyes were fixed on Cole Maddox, the man whose silence carried more weight than sermons. Cole's boot struck the dust as he stepped closer. He removed his hat, revealing a face carved by years of grit and gunsmoke. His voice was low, steady, and deliberate. "I came for her," he repeated, gaze locked on Hannah. "I came to ask for her hand." The sisters erupted in nervous laughter, desperate to reclaim their dominance. "Her hand?" Ruth scoffed. "You'd bind yourself to shame?" Clara added, "She's no bride. She's a ghost in rags." The sheriff barked, "Maddox, you've lost your senses. This town won't stand for a gunfighter tying himself to a seamstress, mocked by her own kin." But Cole's silence was defiance. He turned to Hannah, his eyes steady. "You've carried their laughter long enough," he said. "I'll carry it with you." The crowd gasped. Hannah's heart pounded. She wanted to speak, but words tangled in her throat. Was this real, or another cruel trick? Her sisters pressed closer, their voices sharp. "Say no, Hannah. Don't embarrass yourself further. He'll leave you tomorrow." The sheriff sneered. "A man like him doesn't settle. He'll use you, then vanish." Hannah's humiliation deepened. Every eye in town weighed her worth. She felt the bouquet trembling in her hands, petals falling like fragments of her dignity. Cole stepped nearer, his presence shielding her from the crowd. "I don't ask lightly," he said. "I've seen storms break men. I've seen silence bury women. But I see you, Hannah, and I ask for your hand." The sisters faltered. The sheriff's smirk cracked. The crowd murmured, torn between ridicule and awe. Hannah's lips parted, but her voice was faint. "Why me?" she whispered. Cole's reply was simple, unflinching. "Because you endure." The words struck her like thunder. For years she had endured the laughter, the silence, the shame, and now a man feared by all named endurance as her worth. The sheriff spat in the dust. "Endurance? She's endured because she's nothing. A woman meant to fade." Cole's hand hovered near his revolver, but he did not draw. His silence was louder than gunfire. The sheriff's authority wavered. The sisters clung to their cruelty. "He'll regret this," Ruth hissed. "You'll drag him down." Clara sneered. "No flowers can make you bloom." But Hannah, trembling, lifted her chin. For the first time she met Cole's gaze without shame. "If you ask for my hand," she said softly, "I'll walk with you." The crowd gasped. The sisters' laughter collapsed into stunned silence. The sheriff's jaw tightened, fury simmering. Cole nodded once, firm and resolute. Then it settled. The town buzzed with disbelief. Whispers spread like wildfire. The feared gunfighter had chosen the seamstress mocked by her own blood. Hannah's humiliation had not vanished, but something new stirred a fragile seed of redemption, planted in the dust of Main Street. The sheriff's voice cut through the murmurs. "This won't stand. I'll see to it myself." His threat hung heavy, promising conflict yet to come. But Cole Maddox, silent and unyielding, stood beside Hannah. And though her sisters glared, though the sheriff plotted, Hannah felt the faintest spark of dignity flicker within her chest. For the first time, she did not feel invisible. The morning after Cole Maddox's proposal, Main Street buzzed like a hive struck with a stick. Every storefront, every saloon, every porch carried the same question. Why her? Hannah walked with her head lowered, clutching her sewing basket, but whispers followed her like shadows. "Crazy Hannah," someone muttered. "She bewitched him," another hissed. "Gunfighters don't marry seamstresses. They use them, then leave." Her sisters, Ruth and Clara, fanned the flames. They lingered at the mercantile, voices pitched just loud enough for the town to hear. "She tricked him," Ruth declared. Letters, flowers, all staged. Clara added, "She's desperate enough to forge her own worth." The crowd chuckled, eager for scandal. Hannah's humiliation deepened with every step. She wanted to vanish into the dust, but Cole's shadow fell beside hers. He walked silently, hat low, revolvers gleaming. His presence was a shield, though his silence left room for doubt. At the blacksmith's, a man spat into the dirt. "Maddox, you've lost your edge. A woman like her will drag you down." Cole's eyes lifted, cold and steady. He said nothing, but the man's smirk faltered. Silence in Cole's hands was sharper than steel. Hannah dared a glance at him. "Why don't you speak?" she whispered. Cole's reply was simple. "Words feed fire. Silence smothers it." But silence could not smother the sheriff. Sheriff Dugan leaned against the saloon rail, arms crossed, eyes glinting with malice. His voice carried across the street. "Folks, don't be fooled. This seamstress is no bride. She's a fraud. Those flowers? Stolen. Those letters? Forged. She's tricked the deadliest man in the territory." The crowd gasped, hungry for spectacle. Hannah's sisters nodded eagerly, their laughter cruel. "She's always been a liar," Clara said, "always pretending someone cared." Hannah's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to deny, but her voice failed her. The bouquet she had once cherished now felt like evidence against her. Cole stepped forward, his silence pressing against the sheriff's words. But Dugan smirked. "What's the matter, Maddox? Cat got your tongue? Or are you too blind to see she's making a fool of you?" The crowd roared with laughter. Hannah's humiliation became public theater. She felt her knees weaken, shame burning through her chest. Cole finally spoke, his voice low but cutting. "I see more than you ever will." The sheriff's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly. "We'll see about that. This town deserves truth, not tricks." His words were a promise of war. Hannah and Cole walked on, the whispers trailing them like smoke. At the edge of town, Hannah stopped, her voice trembling. "Why do you stay? They'll never stop mocking me. They'll never stop mocking us." Cole turned, his gaze steady. "Because I've seen storms break men, and I've seen women stand through storms. You stand." Tears stung her eyes. For years she had endured in silence, mocked by her sisters, dismissed by the sheriff, ignored by the town. And now this feared gunfighter named her Endurance's Strength. But the sheriff's venom lingered in the air. The town's whispers grew louder, sharper, more dangerous. Hannah knew the storm was only beginning. As she walked beside Cole, her humiliation still raw, she felt the faintest ember of defiance flicker within her chest. Perhaps silence was no longer enough. Perhaps one day her voice would rise. The night settled heavy over the town, lanterns flickering against the wooden walls. Hannah sat on the porch of Cole Maddox's rented cabin, her hands folded tight, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Silence pressed around them, broken only by the creak of the rocking chair where Cole sat, hat low, revolvers resting at his sides. She spoke first, her voice trembling. "They say I forged letters, that I staged flowers, that I tricked you." Cole didn't move. His silence was steady, but Hannah's words spilled like water from a cracked jug. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I am nothing. Maybe I've lived so long in shame that I don't know how to be anything else." Her sister's laughter echoed in her memory, sharp and cruel. The sheriff's sneer haunted her. She pressed her hands to her chest as if to hold herself together. "I carry scars, Cole. Not the kind you see, not the kind that bleed, but scars that burn every time someone laughs. Scars that whisper I'm worthless." Cole lifted his head, his eyes catching hers in the dim light. His voice was low, deliberate. Scars like that don't fade, but they can shine. Hannah blinked, startled. Shine? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've seen men broken by bullets. I've seen women silenced by shame. But scars the kind you carry, they're proof you endured. Proof you stood when others wanted you to fall. Her throat tightened. Tears welled, but she forced them back. You don't know what it's like. To be mocked by your own blood. To be told you're meant to fade. Cole's gaze hardened. I know more than you think. The words hung heavy. Hannah studied him, searching for cracks in his silence. What do you mean? He hesitated, then spoke. Once I was the boy no one believed in. My father said I'd never be more than dust. My brothers laughed when I missed a shot. They said I'd die nameless. I carried that shame until I learned silence was stronger than laughter, until I learned grit was louder than doubt. Hannah's breath caught. For the first time she saw not just the feared gunfighter, but the boy he once was. Humiliated, scarred, enduring. Cole's voice softened. That's why I came for you. Because I see the same fire. You endure. You carry scars the world cannot see. And that makes you stronger than they'll ever know. Her tears fell freely now, but they were not of shame. They were of recognition, of being seen. The sheriff's shadow loomed in her mind, his venomous words echoing. He'll expose me, she whispered. He'll make the town believe I'm a fraud. Cole's jaw tightened. Let him try. His power is built on fear. Yours will be built on truth. Hannah's heart trembled. For years she had believed her silence was survival. But now Cole's words planted a seed that her scars were not curses, but proof of endurance. She looked at him, voice steady despite the tears. If scars can shine, then maybe mine will light the way. Cole nodded once, firm. They already do. The night deepened, but Hannah felt a flicker of strength within her chest. For the first time, her scars did not feel like chains. They felt like lanterns, glowing in the dark. And though the sheriff plotted in silence, though her sisters sharpened their laughter, Hannah knew she was no longer alone. The church bell tolled, its iron voice summoning the town to gather. Hannah walked slowly, her sisters flanking her like shadows, their whispers sharp enough to cut. Cole Maddox strode beside her, silent as ever, his presence steady but heavy with tension. Inside the church, lanterns flickered against wooden beams. Sheriff Dugan stood at the front, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with malice. The townsfolk filled the pews, eager for spectacle. Hannah felt their stares pierce her skin, each gaze a reminder of her humiliation. The sheriff's voice rang out, smooth and venomous. This town deserves truth, and tonight we'll have it. He gestured toward Hannah. She claims flowers were sent. She claims letters were written, but I say she forged them. I say she staged her own worth. Gas rippled through the crowd. Ruth and Clara smirked, their laughter barely contained. She's always been desperate, Ruth said loudly, always pretending someone cared. Clara added, she's a liar, Sheriff. We've known it all along. Hannah's knees trembled. Her hands clutched the pew, knuckles white. The bouquet she once cherished now felt like evidence against her. Shame burned through her chest. The sheriff pressed on, voice rising. And now she tricks Maddox, the deadliest man in the territory. She makes a fool of him. She makes a fool of us all. The crowd murmured, scandal thick in the air. Hannah's humiliation became theater once more. Cole stepped forward, his silence pressing against the sheriff's words. But Dugan smirked. What's the matter, Maddox? Too blind to see she's deceiving you, or too weak to admit it. The sisters laughed, their cruelty echoing. Hannah's heart pounded. She wanted to scream, to deny, but her voice failed her. The sheriff's words cut deeper. If you care for her, prove it. Stand against me, or abandon her and keep your place in this town. The ultimatum hung heavy. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for Maddox's choice. Hannah's breath caught. Would he leave her? Would he sacrifice her dignity to save himself? Cole's jaw tightened. His hand hovered near his revolver, but he did not draw. His silence stretched, unbearable. Then his voice broke through, low and steady. I don't abandon what I see as truth. The sheriff sneered. Truth? She's a fraud. Cole's eyes locked on Hannah. Her scars are the kind the world cannot see, but I see them clear as day. The crowd gasped. Hannah's tears welled, but they were not of shame. They were of recognition, of being seen. The sheriff's fury boiled. Then you'll face exile. You'll face ruin. This town won't stand for your defiance. Hannah's sisters clapped their hands, delighted. He'll regret it, Clara hissed. She'll drag him down. But Cole's silence was defiance. His presence beside Hannah was unyielding. Hannah's humiliation had reached its peak. The sheriff's trap had sprung. Her sister's betrayal complete. Yet in that moment, with Cole's vow echoing through the church, a fragile seed of redemption stirred. The crowd murmured, torn between ridicule and awe. The sheriff's authority wavered, challenged by the gunfighter's grit. Hannah's voice trembled, but she whispered to herself, perhaps I am not meant to fade. The church air was thick with tension, lanterns flickering against the wooden beams as Sheriff Dugan's words echoed. This town won't stand for your defiance, Maddox. Choose, abandon her, or be cast out. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for his answer. Hannah's heart pounded so loud she feared the whole town could hear it. Her sisters smirked, their laughter sharp as knives. Ruth whispered, he'll leave you. No man stays for shame. Clara added, you'll be alone again, Hannah. Always alone. Hannah's knees trembled. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the wooden floor. Every eye in the church weighed her worth, and she felt herself shrinking under their judgment. Cole Maddox stood silent, his shadow long against the wall. His hand hovered near his revolver, but he did not draw. His silence stretched, unbearable, until the sheriff sneered, say it, Maddox. Admit she's nothing. Admit she's a fraud. Then Cole's voice broke the silence, low and steady, carrying like thunder through the church. Her scars are the kind the world cannot see, but I see them clear as day. The crowd gasped. Hannah's breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes, not of shame, but of recognition. For the first time, someone had spoken her truth aloud. Cole stepped closer, his gaze locked on hers. They laugh because they don't understand. They mock because they've never endured. But I see her strength. I see her fire, and I will not abandon her. The sheriff's face darkened, fury boiling. You'll regret this, Maddox. You'll both regret it. But Cole's silence after his vow was louder than any threat. His presence beside Hannah was unyielding, his loyalty carved into the air. The sisters faltered, their laughter cracking. Ruth muttered, he's blinded. Clara whispered, he'll fall with her. But their cruelty no longer rang as sharp. The crowd shifted uneasily, whispers turning from ridicule to awe. Hannah's tears spilled, but her chin lifted. For years she had endured in silence, mocked and dismissed. Now before the whole town, a man feared by all declared her scars as strength. And in that moment, the story turned. And just like Hannah, many of us carry scars the world cannot see. If you've felt her pain, ride with us in true Western stories where every tale finds its voice, the words blended into the vow, not as a break in the story, but as its heartbeat. The sheriff slammed his fist against the pulpit. This isn't over. I'll strip her dignity piece by piece. I'll show this town she's nothing. But Hannah no longer felt like nothing. Cole's vow had planted something deep within her, a spark of defiance, a seed of redemption. As the crowd dispersed, whispers followed them, but they were no longer only cruel. Some were curious, some were softened. A few even carried respect. Outside, the night air was cool, the stars sharp against the dark. Hannah turned to Cole, her voice trembling. "Why do you stand for me?" Cole's reply was simple, unflinching. "Because you've stood alone long enough." Her heart ached, but not with shame, with something new, something fragile but alive. The sheriff's shadow still loomed, his vengeance certain. But Hannah knew the tide had shifted. Her humiliation was no longer the end of her story. It was the beginning of her rise. The night after the sheriff's ultimatum was heavy with silence. Hannah lay awake in Cole's cabin, staring at the ceiling beams, her mind a storm of doubt. The vow he had spoken in the church echoed in her chest. Her scars are the kind the world cannot see, but I see them clear as day. Yet even those words could not quiet the voices of her sisters, nor the venom of Sheriff Dugan. Ruth's laughter haunted her. "He'll leave you, Hannah. No man stays for shame." Clara's sneer followed. "You'll drag him down. He'll regret you." She turned on her side, clutching the quilt, tears burning her eyes. "Why me?" she whispered into the dark. "Why would he choose me?" Cole sat in the corner, sharpening his revolver with deliberate calm. His silence filled the room, but Hannah's doubts spilled like water. "They'll never stop mocking me. The sheriff will never stop. You'll lose everything because of me." Cole's hand stilled. He looked at her, his eyes steady. "I've lost before. I've been mocked before. I've carried shame heavier than bullets." Hannah blinked, startled. "You?" He nodded once. "When I was a boy, I missed a shot. My brothers laughed. My father said I'd never be a man. I carried that humiliation until I learned silence was stronger than laughter, until I learned grit was louder than doubt." His words struck her, but her doubts clung tight. "But you're feared, respected. I'm nothing." Cole leaned forward, voice low. "You're not nothing. You endure. That's why I chose you." Her tears spilled, but she shook her head. "Endurance isn't enough. The sheriff will destroy me. He'll destroy us." Cole's jaw tightened. "Let him try. He builds his power on fear. We'll build ours on truth." The words lingered, but Hannah's heart trembled. She rose, stepping onto the porch. The night air was cool, stars sharp against the dark. She whispered to herself, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm meant to fade." Cole followed, standing beside her. His silence pressed against her despair. Finally he spoke. "I've seen storms break men. I've seen silence bury women. But I've never seen you break. You stand. Even when they laugh. Even when they mock. You stand." Her breath caught. For years she had endured, but she had never thought of endurance as strength. She had seen it only as survival. Cole's voice softened. "That's why I came for you. Because you carry scars the world cannot see. And those scars make you stronger than they'll ever know." Hannah's tears fell freely now, but they were not of shame. They were of recognition, of being seen. Still, doubt lingered. What if I fail? What if I can't rise when the sheriff strikes again? Cole's reply was simple, unflinching. Then I'll rise with you. The words wrapped around her like armor. For the first time, she felt the weight of her scars lessen. The night stretched long, but Hannah's heart shifted. Doubt still whispered, but beneath it, a spark of defiance flickered. Perhaps she was not meant to fade. Perhaps her scars could shine. And though the sheriff plotted in silence, though her sisters sharpened their laughter, Hannah knew she was no longer alone. The sun blazed over the town square, heat shimmering against the wooden storefronts. Word had spread fast Sheriff Dugan had called for a gathering. By noon the square was packed, every eye hungry for spectacle. Hannah stood at the edge, her sisters flanking her with cruel smiles, while Cole Maddox stood silent at her side, his shadow long across the dust. The sheriff strode to the center, boots striking, loud voice booming. This town deserves truth, and today we'll strip away lies. His gaze locked on Hannah. You've tricked us long enough. Flowers stolen, letters forged, dignity staged. Admit it, Seamstress. Admit you're a fraud. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ruth and Clara laughed, their voices sharp. She's always been desperate, Ruth called, always pretending someone cared. Clara added, she's nothing but shame wrapped in rags. Hannah's chest tightened. Her hands trembled, her throat dry. Every eye weighed her worth, and she felt herself shrinking under their judgment. The sheriff pressed closer, voice rising. Confess, Hannah. Confess before this town, or watch Maddox abandon you. The crowd leaned forward, eager for her humiliation. Hannah's knees weakened. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the dust beneath her feet. Cole stepped forward, his silence pressing against the sheriff's venom. His hand hovered near his revolver, but he did not draw. His presence was a shield, but the sheriff sneered. What's the matter, Maddox? Too blind to see she's deceiving you, or too weak to admit it? The sisters laughed louder, their cruelty echoing. Hannah's humiliation became theater once more. The sheriff's voice cut deeper. This town will not be mocked. Admit your deceit, or be cast out. Hannah's breath caught. Her heart pounded. She wanted to scream, to deny, but her voice failed her. Shame burned through her chest. Cole's jaw tightened. His silence stretched, unbearable, until he spoke, low and steady. I see more than you ever will. The sheriff's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly. Then prove it. Stand against me, or abandon her. The crowd roared, hungry for conflict. Hannah's tears welled, but she lifted her chin. For years she had endured in silence. Now, before the whole town, she felt a spark of defiance flicker within her chest. The sheriff stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. Confess, Hannah. Confess or be destroyed. Her sisters leaned in, their laughter cruel. Say it, Hannah. Admit you're nothing. But Hannah's voice, trembling yet steady, broke through. I am not nothing. The crowd gasped. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Ruth and Clara faltered. Hannah's voice rose stronger. I have carried scars the world cannot see. I have endured your laughter, your cruelty, your silence, and still I stand. The square fell silent. The sheriff's authority wavered. The sisters' laughter collapsed into stunned whispers. Cole's presence beside her was unyielding, his silence louder than gunfire. The showdown had begun, not with bullets, but with voice. Hannah's humiliation was no longer the end of her story. It was the beginning of her rise. The sheriff's fury boiled, but the crowd shifted. Whispers turned from ridicule to awe. Hannah's scars had become her strength, her silence transformed into defiance. And though the sheriff plotted vengeance, Though her sisters seethed, Hannah knew the tide had turned. The square was silent, the sheriff's demand hanging heavy in the air. Hannah stood trembling, her sister's laughter sharp, the crowd's eyes piercing. For years she had endured humiliation in silence, but now something within her shifted. Her voice, faint at first, broke through. "I am not nothing." Gas rippled across the square. The sheriff's eyes narrowed, his authority challenged. Ruth faltered, Clara's smirk cracked. Hannah's voice grew stronger. "I have carried scars the world cannot see. I have endured your laughter, your cruelty, your silence, and still I stand." The crowd hushed, whispers fading into awe. Hannah's words rang against the wooden storefronts, echoing louder than the sheriff's threats. She turned to her sisters, her gaze steady. "You mocked me when I dreamed. You laughed when I hoped. You told me I was meant to fade, but I endured. And endurance is not weakness. It is strength." Ruth's face flushed, Clara's eyes darted away. Their laughter collapsed into silence. Hannah faced the sheriff, her voice unwavering. "You said I forged letters. You said I staged flowers. You said I tricked this town. But I have nothing to confess. My only crime is believing I was worth more than your scorn. And today, I prove it." The sheriff's jaw tightened, fury boiling. "You think words will save you? You think this town will follow you?" Hannah's reply was steady. "I don't need them to follow me. I need them to see me. And today, they will." The crowd shifted, murmurs turning from ridicule to respect. Mothers held children closer, men lowered their hats. The seamstress, mocked for years, now stood tall, her voice cutting through shame. Cole Maddox stood silent beside her, his presence unyielding. His silence was not absence. It was strength, a shield for her rising voice. Hannah's words carried on. "I have been invisible. I have been mocked. But scars are proof of survival. Scars are proof of endurance. And endurance is proof of worth." The sheriff's authority wavered. His threats rang hollow against her defiance. Ruth whispered, "She's changed." Clara muttered, "She's not the same." The crowd leaned closer, drawn to her courage. Hannah's humiliation transformed into redemption before their eyes. She lifted her chin, her voice ringing clear. "You cannot strip me of dignity. You cannot silence me. I am Hannah, and I will not fade." The square erupted in murmurs, awe spreading like wildfire. The sheriff's power cracked, his grip on the town slipping. Cole's eyes gleamed with pride. Though his lips remained sealed, his silence underscored her triumph. The sisters shrank back, their cruelty exposed. The sheriff's fury boiled, but his authority shattered. Hannah's voice had risen, and with it, her redemption. The crowd, once eager for her humiliation, now stood in respect. The seamstress, mocked for years, had become a symbol of endurance, of scars turned to strength. And though the sheriff plotted vengeance, though her sisters seethed, Hannah knew her voice had changed everything. Her humiliation was no longer the end of her story. It was the beginning of her rise. The square still hummed with whispers, but they were no longer cruel. Hannah stood tall, her voice echoing in the silence she had broken. The sheriff's authority lay shattered, her sisters humbled, the crowd transformed. For the first time, she felt the weight of humiliation lift, replaced by dignity earned through endurance. Cole Maddox remained at her side, silent as ever, his presence steady. His silence was not emptiness. It was pride, carved into the dust of Main Street. The sheriff spat into the dirt, his fury boiling. "This isn't over," he growled, but his words rang hollow. The crowd no longer followed him. Mothers held children closer, men lowered their hats, and women whispered Hannah's name with respect. Ruth and Clara shrank back, their laughter gone. Ruth muttered, "She's changed." Clara whispered, "She's not the same." Their cruelty had collapsed under the weight of Hannah's voice. Hannah turned to them, her gaze steady. "You mocked me when I dreamed. You laughed when I hoped, but I endured, and endurance is strength." Her sisters lowered their eyes, shame burning their cheeks. The sheriff tried once more, his voice desperate. "She's nothing. Don't be fooled." But the crowd murmured, their whispers rising against him. His power cracked, his grip on the town slipping. Cole stepped forward, his silence pressing against the sheriff's venom. His hand hovered near his revolver, but he did not draw. His presence alone was enough. Hannah lifted her chin, her voice ringing clear. "I will not fade. I will not be silenced. My scars are proof of survival. My endurance is proof of worth. And today, I rise." The crowd erupted in murmurs of awe. The seamstress, mocked for years, had become a symbol of strength, of scars turned to light. The sheriff's fury boiled, but his authority was gone. He turned away, defeated, his shadow shrinking against the sun. Hannah's sisters stood silent, their cruelty exposed. The town watched as Hannah and Cole walked hand in hand through the square, no longer mocked but admired. Children whispered, "She's brave." Women murmured, "She endured." Men lowered their hats in respect. Hannah's humiliation had transformed into redemption. Her silence had become voice. Her scars had become lanterns, glowing in the dark. Cole's presence beside her was unyielding, his silence louder than gunfire. His vow had carried her through, but it was her voice that had won the town. As they walked, Hannah felt the weight of years lift. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer mocked. She was seen. The crowd parted, watching in awe as the seamstress and the gunfighter walked together. The town had learned a lesson carved in grit and voice. Dignity cannot be stripped. Scars cannot be erased. Endurance cannot be mocked. At the edge of the square, Hannah paused, turning to the crowd. Her voice was soft but steady. This was one of many true Western stories. If it stirred your heart, saddle up with us for the next ride. The words blended seamlessly into the moment, not as a break in the story, but as its closing breath. Cold, silent as ever. Hannah's hand rested in his, steady and strong. Together they walked into the horizon, redemption, riding with them. And though the sheriff plotted in silence, though her sisters seethed, Hannah knew her scars had become her strength. Her humiliation had become her triumph. Her silence had become her voice. The